power, status, control. He had everything except an heir. Not believing in love, a billionaire decides to pay a stranger to bear his child without involvement. But destiny changes his plans. What was just an agreement transforms into an unexpected bond. When secrets from the past emerge and danger approaches, he must choose: follow the plan or fight for what really matters. The rain battered the bulletproof windows of the Porsche Cayenne as Nathan Morgan crossed Fifth Avenue. At 45, the businessman contemplated the empire he had built. The Morgan Group, a giant in the American real estate market, with development stretching from Seattle to Miami. In the Italian leather seat, he adjusted his Hermes tie, a gift he had given himself after closing his latest billion-dollar deal. The traffic light turned red, and his dark brown eyes captured an unusual scene. Under the awning of a commercial building, a young woman was sheltering from the storm. She wasn't an ordinary homeless person. There was something about her posture, the way she remained upright even in adverse circumstances, that stood out from the scene. "Shall we proceed, Mr. Morgan?" asked his driver when the light turned green. "Wait," he ordered, without taking his eyes off the young woman. "Pull over there." Against all his better judgment, Nathan got out of the car, protecting himself with a Burberry umbrella. He approached the young woman, who instinctively backed away. "You don't need to be afraid," he said, in a tone that seemed more like an order than comfort. "You're not from here, are you?" The young woman hesitated before answering, her French accent evident. No. I arrived 3 months ago." "Emma Laurent," she introduced herself after a few seconds of tense silence. "I came to America, chasing a dream, but things didn't go as planned." Nathan observed her more carefully. Despite her simple and worn clothes, Emma maintained a dignity that intrigued him. Her green eyes conveyed a mixture of desperation and determination that he recognized. It was the same look he saw in the mirror years ago when he was starting his journey. "I have a proposal for you," he declared, surprising himself. "Something that could change your life." Emma raised an eyebrow, suspicious. "What kind of proposal?" "The kind you don't discuss on the street," he replied, gesturing towards the car. "Let's talk somewhere more appropriate. I promise you'll be safe and free to refuse if you wish." The rain increased, and Emma looked at the dark sky, then at her soaked clothes, and finally at the elegant man in front of her. She had learned to trust her instincts, and something about him, despite his apparent coldness, didn't scare her. "D'accord, all right," she agreed, following him to the car. During the journey to the Plaza Hotel, Nathan remained silent, only responding to a few work calls. Emma watched the city through the window, trying to decipher what kind of proposal a man like that could have for someone in her situation. In the private room of the hotel's restaurant, after ensuring they wouldn't be interrupted, Nathan got straight to the point. "I need a mother for my child." Emma almost choked on the water she was drinking. "What?" "A purely professional agreement," he continued, his voice controlled as if he were in a business meeting. "You will bear my child, have all the necessary medical care, live in my mansion during the pregnancy, and then receive an amount that will allow you to start your life over wherever you want." "Why me?" asked Emma, still stunned by the proposal. "Because you have nothing to lose and much to gain," he replied pragmatically. "And because there's something about you, something different." Emma immersed herself in her thoughts. The last few weeks had been a nightmare, sleeping in shelters, doing odd jobs to survive. The proposal was absurd, but it represented a real chance for a fresh start. Besides, what choice did she have? "How much?" she finally asked. $5 million, Nathan replied without hesitation. Half after the pregnancy confirmation, half after the birth. Emma felt her breath catch. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of having. She could finally leave her past behind, rebuild her life far from everything and everyone who was pursuing her. "There's one condition," he added, his tone even more serious. "No emotional involvement. It will be a contract, nothing more. After the birth and the breastfeeding period, our paths separate forever." Emma nodded slowly as the waiter served the dinner Nathan had ordered. The meal passed in contemplative silence, each lost in their own thoughts and calculations. At the end of the night, When the contract was placed on the table, Emma took the pen with trembling fingers. Before signing, she looked into Nathan's eyes and made her only demand. "Promise you'll never ask about my past." He agreed with a nod. After all, her past didn't interest him, only the future he planned to build. The Morgan Mansion, in the Hamptons, was a world apart. Emma watched wide-eyed the immense gardens designed by a renowned landscape architect as the car traveled down the oak-lined driveway. The modern construction, all glass and exposed concrete, stood majestically against the New York sky. "Mrs. Thompson will show you to your quarters," Nathan said as soon as they entered. A middle-aged housekeeper approached, her face a mask of controlled curiosity. "If you need anything, ask her." Emma followed Mrs. Thompson through corridors decorated with contemporary artwork. Her new room was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in Paris. The view from the balcony revealed the infinity pool and in the distance the ocean. "Mr. Morgan is different," commented Mrs. Thompson while organizing the empty closet. "I've never seen him bring anyone to live here, not even when he was married." "He was married?" Emma asked, her curiosity overcoming her caution. "Twice," Mrs. Thompson replied, lowering her voice. "The first, with Heather Vanderbilt, lasted only 8 months. The second, with Olivia Sinclair, didn't last a year. After that, he closed himself off even more." Emma absorbed the information in silence. The next morning, an entire team of professionals invaded her room. Personal stylist, hairdresser, makeup artist, manicurist. "Mr. Morgan's orders," they explained. In a few hours, Emma barely recognized the woman in the mirror. During lunch, served on the terrace overlooking the gardens, Nathan observed her with clinical approval. "Tomorrow we start the medical consultations. Dr. Carter is the best specialist in assisted reproduction in the country." "Have you done all the necessary tests?" Emma asked, playing with the salad on her plate. "Yes, everything is ready on my part," he replied, without raising his eyes from the documents he was reading. "Now it only depends on you." The following days were a sequence of consultations, exams, and procedures. Emma was surprised by the efficiency with which everything was conducted. Nathan treated the pregnancy like another of his business projects. One night, unable to sleep, Emma wandered through the mansion when she found the library. Thousands of books filled the walls from floor to ceiling. In a leather armchair, Nathan was reading, absorbed. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt," she murmured, turning to leave. "Stay," he said, surprising them both. "Do you like to read?" "It's what kept me sane in the last few months," she replied, approaching the shelves. Her fingers slid over an old edition of The Little Prince. "In French," Nathan observed. "It was my mother's." Something in his voice made Emma turn. For a moment she saw a shadow of vulnerability in his eyes, soon replaced by the usual mask of indifference. "Did she leave too?" Emma ventured. The silence that followed was dense. Finally, Nathan closed his book. "Some people aren't born to be mothers," he said, standing up. "Good night, Emma." Days later, during another consultation, Dr. Carter entered the room with a smile. "Congratulations. The first attempt was successful. You're pregnant, Emma." Nathan, who was accompanying the consultation standing near the window, turned abruptly. For an instant, Emma saw something different in his gaze, fear, emotion, but he quickly regained his composure. "Great," he said, turning his attention back to his phone. "I'll arrange the first installment of the payment today." That night, alone in her room, Emma cried. She didn't know if it was from relief, fear, or a mixture of both. Her hand rested on her still flat belly, while memories of her life in Paris tried to emerge. No, she couldn't think about that now. She had made a choice, and there was no turning back. Downstairs, Nathan poured himself a drink in his office, observing the night through the panoramic windows. In the reflection of the glass for a moment, he saw his mother's face, the same one that had haunted him for 30 years, since the day she went out to buy cigarettes and never came back. His phone vibrated. It was a message from his sister. "Audrey, have you lost your mind, a stranger? The board will go crazy when they find out." Nathan blocked the phone without responding. The board, his family, everyone wanted to control his life. But this time, it would be different. This time, He would be in control, or so he thought. Dr. Carter's office was silent when the doctor entered with the results of the latest ultrasound. His face had an expression difficult to decipher, which made Emma instinctively grip the edge of the examination table where she was lying. "Well, I have news that will surprise you," the doctor began, adjusting his glasses. "Actually, it's 3 pieces of news." Nathan, who until then had been checking emails on his phone, looked up. "What do you mean, 3? "Congratulations," smiled the doctor, turning the ultrasound monitor. "It's triplets." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma felt the air escape from her lungs, while Nathan, for the first time since she had met him, seemed genuinely stunned. 3? He repeated, his normally controlled voice betraying a slight tremor. "This wasn't in the plans." "Nature sometimes surprises us," replied the doctor, beginning to explain about multiple pregnancies and special care. On the way back to the mansion, the silence in the car was palpable. Emma observed Nathan from the corner of her eye, his tense jaw, fingers nervously drumming on the Porsche's steering wheel. "If you want to back out of the agreement," Emma began, her voice low. "No," he cut her off abruptly, then softening his tone. "No, an agreement is an agreement. We'll just need to adapt the plans." In the days that followed, Emma noticed subtle changes in Nathan's behavior. He began to appear during her meals, asking questions about her diet. A team of decorators was hired to transform an entire wing of the mansion into a triple nursery. One morning, as Emma was sunbathing by the pool area, Mrs. Thompson approached with a worried expression. "Miss Emma, this arrived for you," said the housekeeper, handing her an envelope with no return address. Emma felt her heart freeze as she recognized the handwriting. Inside, there was only a French newspaper clipping and a note. "Vous ne pouvez pas vous cacher pour toujours." You can't hide forever. With trembling hands, Emma burned the envelope and the note in her bathroom. She needed to be more careful. Her past couldn't reach her here, not now. During dinner that night, Nathan surprised her by sitting at the table. "We need to discuss some changes," he announced. "Considering the multiple pregnancy, I've hired an additional security team. You'll have a driver and a personal security guard starting tomorrow." Emma swallowed hard. "I don't think it's necessary." "It's not a suggestion," he interrupted. "It's my children you're carrying." The word children, in plural, made something tremble inside him, although he maintained a neutral expression. In the library later, Emma found Nathan reviewing documents. She had already noticed that this was his refuge when something was bothering him. "May I?" she asked, indicating the nearby armchair. He nodded, without raising his eyes. Emma picked up a random book and sat down, but couldn't concentrate. The letter from that morning still haunted her. "Have you ever felt like your past was a shadow you can never leave behind?" she asked, almost without realizing. Nathan finally looked up. For a moment, Emma saw in his eyes a reflection of her own pain. "Sometimes," he replied, surprising her. "The past is like a ghost that refuses to rest." The moment of shared vulnerability was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Audrey, Nathan's sister, who entered without waiting for a response. "So it's true," she said, looking Emma up and down. "The board is in an uproar, Nathan. A stranger bearing the heir to the Morgan Group. It's a scandal." "Heirs," Nathan corrected, his voice sharp. "There are 3, and my decisions are not subject to the board's or the family's approval." Audrey laughed humorlessly. "Did you at least investigate her background? Do we know who she really is?" Emma felt her blood run cold. Nathan, however, stood up, his presence dominating the room. "Emma is under my protection now," he declared, his voice leaving no room for arguments. "And I suggest you remember that I'm still the CEO of the group." After Audrey left, a heavy silence hung over the library. Emma noticed her hands were shaking, slightly. "Thank you," she murmured. Nathan observed her for a long moment. "Don't thank me, just don't make me regret it." That night in her room, Emma took out her old French cell phone, hidden in the back of a drawer. There were dozens of unread messages and missed calls. Her finger hovered over the power button, But she resisted the temptation. Some doors needed to remain closed for everyone's safety. Emma's pregnancy entered the 4th month, and the Morgan mansion seemed to breathe new energy. The morning sickness had subsided, but other symptoms emerged, like the inexplicable craving for peanut butter and pickle sandwiches at 3 in the morning. On one of these early mornings, while savoring her peculiar combination in the kitchen, Emma heard footsteps. It was Nathan without his jacket, tie loosened, looking exhausted. "Can't sleep?" he asked, pouring himself some water. "Your children have interesting tastes," she replied, indicating her unlikely plate. A half smile appeared on his face, something so rare that Emma almost dropped her sandwich. "My mother had cravings like that," he commented, sitting down. "Shrimp with chocolate, can you imagine?" Emma noticed how he always tensed when mentioning his mother, as if each word cost a physical effort. "Do you have photos of her?" she ventured. To her surprise, Nathan stood up and motioned for her to follow him. In the library, he took out an old album from a locked drawer. "Here," he pointed to a photo. "Elizabeth Morgan, at 30 years old." The woman in the photo was stunning, with the same penetrating eyes as Nathan. She looked happy, holding a boy of about 5 years old. "It was taken a week before she left," he said, his voice distant. "She said she was going to buy cigarettes, left the car in the garage, walked out, never came back." Emma felt a lump in her throat. "You never knew why?" "My father hired detectives, but she simply vanished. Years later, we discovered she had rebuilt her life in Italy, never tried to contact us." The silence that followed was interrupted by a strong kick from the babies. Emma instinctively took Nathan's hand and placed it on her belly. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The babies moved again, and Emma saw something change in Nathan's gaze, as if an invisible wall was beginning to crack. "It's extraordinary," he murmured, his hand still on her belly. The intimacy of the moment was broken by the sound of Emma's phone falling from her pocket. Nathan picked it up before she could, and his face changed when he saw the screen. "Why do you have a hidden French cell phone?" he asked, his voice returning to its usual cold tone. Emma felt panic rising. 15 missed calls from someone named Pierre," he continued, his eyes darkening. "I thought we had an agreement about the past." "And we do," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "That phone, it's from a life that no longer exists." Nathan studied her for a long moment. "Is there something you need to tell me, Emma? Something that could affect our agreement?" No, she replied too quickly. Before he could insist, Mrs. Thompson hurriedly entered the library. "Mr. Morgan, sorry to interrupt, but it's urgent. The police are at the gate." Emma felt her blood run cold. Nathan noticed her sudden paleness. "Why?" he asked the housekeeper. "They say they received an anonymous tip, something about a French woman wanted by Interpol." The look Nathan gave Emma was cutting. "Wait here," he ordered, leaving with Mrs. Thompson. Emma collapsed in the armchair, trembling. Her fingers unconsciously touched the small scar on her wrist, a reminder of a night in Paris she was desperately trying to forget. 20 minutes later, Nathan returned. His face was unreadable. "They're gone," he said simply. "My contacts took care of it." "Nathan, No," he cut her off. "I don't want explanations, not yet. But I'll make 2 things very clear. First, nothing can happen to these children. Second, if there's anything that could harm us, I'd better—" "No now?" Emma nodded, silent tears running down her face. "Tomorrow I have an important meeting in Washington," he continued. "I'll be back in 2 days. Use that time to decide how much you want to tell me." That night, alone in her room, Emma took out the French cell phone. With trembling fingers, she typed a message to Pierre. "C'est fini. Ne me cherche plus. It's over. Don't look for me anymore." Then she broke the SIM card and threw the device into the toilet. As she watched the pieces being carried away by the water, she caressed her growing belly. "Everything will be all right," she whispered, not knowing if she was trying to convince the babies or herself. In the office, Nathan watched the night through the windows, an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand. His reflection in the glass seemed to mock him. Once again, someone who had entered his life held secrets that could destroy everything. But for the first time, the idea of simply cutting ties, as he usually did, seemed painfully impossible. Nathan's absence during his trip to Washington left the mansion steeped in tense silence. Emma spent hours in the library, flipping through books without really reading them, her mind lost between Paris and New York, between the past that haunted her and the future she carried in her womb. On the morning of the second day, while having breakfast in the winter garden, Mrs. Thompson entered hurriedly, carrying the day's newspaper. "Miss Emma, I think you should see this." In the social column, a small note caught attention. Morgan Group heir expecting triplets from mysterious Frenchwoman. Sources close to the family raised suspicions about the future mother's past. Emma felt her stomach churn, and it wasn't because of the pregnancy. How had they discovered this? Who was digging into her past? "Are you all right, miss? You look pale," Rita worried. Yes, I'm fine, just a bit of nausea." That afternoon, during her daily walk through the gardens, accompanied by the security guard assigned by Nathan, Emma noticed a car parked across the street. The driver seemed to be photographing the mansion. Her heart raced as she recognized the man. He was one of Pierre's former associates. She quickly returned inside, her hands trembling as she typed a message to Nathan. "We need to talk when you get back, it's important." The response came almost instantly. "I'll be there in 2 hours. Wait in the office." Nathan's office was his private sanctuary, an environment that reflected his personality, organized, imposing, and somewhat lonely. Emma was waiting seated in one of the leather armchairs, observing the city through the panoramic windows, when he arrived. "What happened?" he asked, without beating around the bush. Emma took a deep breath. "There are people looking for me. People I knew in Paris. The same ones who prompted the police visit?" "Probably," she admitted. "Nathan, I wasn't completely honest about my past." He sat behind his desk, his face a studied mask of calm. "Go on." "In Paris, I worked at an art gallery. I was an assistant curator," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Pierre, my supervisor, had other businesses. Businesses that I discovered weren't exactly legal." "What kind of businesses?" "Art," she answered, lowering her voice. "Some of the works we sold and weren't originals." Nathan leaned forward. "Forgeries?" Emma nodded. "I found out by chance. When I confronted Pierre, he said I was already too involved to leave, that he had evidence against me. And you ran." "I had no choice," she whispered, tears starting to form. "He had connections everywhere. Police, politics. I came to America to try to start over, but now..." The silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of the babies moving. Emma placed her hand on her belly, a gesture that had already become automatic. To her surprise, Nathan stood up and walked over to her, kneeling in front of her. "Look at me, Emma," he asked, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "Nothing is going to happen to you or our children, do you understand? Nothing." "But they're dangerous, Nathan. You don't know Pierre, and they don't know me." He cut her off, his voice returning to its usual authoritative tone. "I have enough. Resources and connections to protect what's mine." The word mine hung between them, loaded with unspoken meanings. At that moment, Olivia burst into the office, waving a magazine. "Have you seen this? It's a disaster. The group's stocks fell 3% just today because of these rumors about..." She stopped when she saw the scene, her brother kneeling before Emma, their hands intertwined without them realizing it. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked, her voice dripping with irony. Nathan stood up but remained by Emma's side. "Yes, you are, and I suggest you knock next time." "Nathan, be reasonable," Olivia insisted. "The board is concerned. This whole story is affecting the group's image. Maybe if..." "Enough," he thundered. "Emma isn't going anywhere. And as for the board, to remind them who built this empire." After Olivia left, Emma realized she was trembling. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause problems for your business." "Businesses recover," he replied, surprising. "Some things are more important." That night, as Emma prepared for bed, she found a small package on her bed. Inside was an antique brooch, delicately crafted. "It was my mother's," said the note in Nathan's firm handwriting. "She wore it when she was pregnant with me. They say it brings luck." Emma pinned the brooch to her robe, feeling the weight of the jewel and its significance. Outside her window, the New York night sparkled like an inverted starry sky, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to dream of a different future. The 6th month of pregnancy arrived with the beginning of the New York winter. Emma, now with a pronounced belly, had adapted to a new routine. Mornings were dedicated to medical follow-ups, afternoons to preparations for the babies, and nights belonged to the library. It was there that she and Nathan, without realizing it, had created their own ritual. He with his reports, she with her books, sharing a silence that was gradually becoming comfortable. "The babies are restless today," Emma commented, breaking the silence on one of these nights. "I think they're going to be workaholic executives like their father." Nathan looked up from his documents, a half smile playing on his lips, or restless artists like their mother. The comment, made with unusual softness, made Emma blush. In recent days, she had noticed subtle changes in Nathan, glances that lasted a second longer, small gestures of consideration, like the chamomile teas that always appeared on her table before bed. "Speaking of art," she began hesitant, "there's something I want to show you." Emma took a small sketchbook from her bag. On the pages, delicate sketches depicted the mansion's gardens, the library, and, to Nathan's surprise, himself absorbed in his work. "You have talent," he said, carefully flipping through the pages. "Is this what you did at the gallery in Paris? Besides, you know." "I restored works," she replied, a shadow passing over her face. "I was good at it." "Maybe two." "Good, that's how Pierre noticed me." Nathan closed the notebook, his jaw tense. "Has he tried to contact you again?" "Not directly, but—" Emma hesitated. "Yesterday I received this." She handed him a crumpled envelope. Inside was an old photo showing Emma in a Parisian studio working on a canvas. On the back, a message, in French. "Remember your talents and what can happen if you don't use them correctly." "Why didn't you show me this before?" Nathan asked, his controlled voice masking anger. "Because I know I've already caused too many problems. Your sister is right. The group's stocks—" "To hell with the stocks," he interrupted, surprising her with the outburst. "Emma, you're carrying my children. Your safety is non-negotiable." At that moment, one of the babies gave a particularly strong kick. Emma groaned, putting her hand to her belly. In an instant, Nathan was by her side. "What is it? Do I need to call the doctor?" "Non, it's nothing," she smiled, taking his hand and placing it on the spot. "I think someone wants to join the conversation." The touch, although already familiar, still caused an electric current between them. Nathan let his hand remain there, feeling the gentle movements. "It's amazing," he murmured. "Sometimes it still doesn't seem real." "I know what you mean," Emma replied, her voice low. "Sometimes I wake up at night and need a moment to remember it's not a dream." Their gazes met, and for a moment, all carefully. Constructed barriers seemed to melt. Nathan imperceptibly moved closer, his woody perfume enveloping Emma. The moment was broken by urgent knocks on the door. It was Rita, pale and agitated. "Mr. Morgan, sorry to interrupt, but it's urgent. There's been a breach in the mansion's security system. All cameras are off." Nathan stood up immediately, his businessman mode coming back to the surface. "Call the security team. I want the whole house checked, and Emma doesn't stay alone for a minute." As he gave orders over the phone, Emma felt a cold shiver. In her mind, Pierre's voice echoed, "You'll never really escape, ma chérie." Hours later, with security restored and the house calm, Emma was preparing for bed when she noticed something on her dressing table. A small blue velvet box. Inside, she found a delicate sapphire necklace and a card. "To protect you and our children. It's not a lucky charm like the brooch, but it should do. N." Emma touched the blue stones, feeling tears in her eyes. The gesture said more than any words could express. It was a silent promise of protection, of care, and perhaps something more. In his office, Nathan was finishing a call. "I want everything on Pierre Dubois and his operations in France. Every detail, every connection. And I want it yesterday." Hanging up the phone, he picked up the sketchbook that Emma had forgotten. His fingers traced the contours of the sketches, while his mind struggled against a truth increasingly difficult to deny. What had begun as a contract was turning into something much more complex and frightening. The 7th month of pregnancy brought with it the cold of the New York winter and a series of changes in the Morgan mansion. Security had been reinforced, with guards on all shifts and a new, even more sophisticated camera system. But the most significant change wasn't visible to the eyes. It was in the way Nathan and Emma gravitated around each other, in a silent dance of unadmitted feelings. On a particularly cold afternoon, as Emma rested in the conservatory, Olivia appeared unexpectedly. "We need to talk," she announced, sitting down uninvited. "It's about my brother." Emma adjusted herself in the chaise longue, her hand instinctively protecting her belly. "What about him?" "Don't you see what you're doing to him? Nathan was never like this. Since you arrived, he's different, distracted in meetings, cancelling important commitments." "I don't know what you're talking about," Emma replied, but her heart raced. "Yes, you do," Olivia insisted, leaning forward. "And I also know that you're not who you say you are. I hired a private investigator." Emma's blood ran cold. "You had no right to do that." "I have every right to protect my family," Olivia shot back, pulling an envelope from her purse. "Pierre Dubois, familiar name?" Before Emma could respond, a voice cut through the air like steel. "What are you doing here, Olivia?" Nathan was standing at the conservatory door, his face a mask of contained fury. "Doing what you should have done," she replied, throwing the envelope on the table. "Investigating who this woman really is." "Leave," he ordered, his voice dangerously low. "Nathan, be reasonable." "Now!" After Olivia left, a heavy silence fell over the conservatory. Emma tried to stand up, but her advanced belly made movements difficult. Nathan approached to help her, his gentle touch contrasting with his previous anger. "I'm sorry about my sister," he said, still holding her arm. "She's just trying to protect you," Emma murmured, "and she's not entirely wrong." Nathan led her to the library, their usual refuge. The afternoon sun painted the environment in golden tones, creating an almost unreal atmosphere. "Emma, see," he began, his voice softer. "I need to tell you something." She waited, her heart beating out of rhythm. "I already knew about Pierre. I had everything investigated after that first threat." "What? Why didn't you tell me anything?" "Because I wanted to protect you," he answered, running his hand through his hair in a rare gesture of nervousness. "And because the more I discovered about your past, the more I admired your courage." Emma blinked, surprised. "Admired? You faced Pierre alone. You ran to protect your principles. That requires a strength that few have. Or a stupidity that many would criticize," she smiled sadly. "No," he said, moving closer. "It's not stupidity. It's integrity. Something rare in the world I live in. One of the babies chose this moment to give a strong kick." Emma laughed, breaking the tension of the moment. "They always seem to know when the conversation gets too serious," she commented. Nathan smiled, a true smile, one of those she rarely saw. His face transformed when he smiled like that, the hard lines softening, his eyes gaining an almost youthful glow. "Emma," he called after a moment, "the contract we made." She felt her heart stop for an instant. "Yes? Maybe we need to revise it." Before she could process the meaning of those words, Rita burst through the door, breathless. "Mr. Morgan, the police are here again, and there are journalists in front of the mansion." Emma paled. "What do they want?" "Apparently," Rita replied. Hesitantly, "someone sent a detailed complaint about illegal activities in France. It's in all the online newspapers." Nathan cursed under his breath, grabbing his phone. "Olivia," he muttered, his voice laden with anger and disappointment. Emma felt the world spin. Her legs weakened, and if Nathan hadn't held her, she would have fallen. "Forgive me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I should have told you everything from the beginning. Shh, he calmed her, guiding her to the sofa. It's not your fault, and I won't let anything happen to you or our children. The word our made something tremble inside her. She looked into his eyes, searching for any sign of doubt or regret, but found only determination and something else, something neither of them was ready to name. Trust me, he asked, his hand still holding hers, and for the first time in a long time, Emma allowed herself to trust someone completely. The scandal exploded like a summer storm over New York. Within hours, the story of the French forger pregnant with billionaire Nathan Morgan's triplets dominated all the news. Reporters camped in front of the mansion, and social media was boiling, with speculation and conspiracy theories. In the main living room, transformed into a crisis operations center, Nathan was conducting a video conference with his legal team. Emma, seated on the farthest sofa, observed the movement with a mixture of guilt and concern. I don't care how I want these accusations debunked by the end of the day, he ordered, ending the call. Turning to Emma, his countenance softened. How are you feeling? Like a ticking time bomb about to destroy everything you've built, she replied, trying to hold back tears. Nathan crossed the room and sat beside her, taking her hands in his. Look at me, Emma, none of this is your fault. No? Your sister was right. Since I arrived, I've only brought problems, the stock value plummeting, your reputation tarnished. To hell with all that, he interrupted, with an intensity that surprised her. You think I care about stocks when... He stopped abruptly, as if he was afraid of his own words. Emma felt her heart race. When? She encouraged, almost in a whisper. The moment was interrupted by Rita, who entered the room hurriedly. Mr. Morgan, there's an urgent call from France. It's a Pierre Dubois. Says he'll only speak to you. Emma paled, her hand instinctively going to her belly. Nathan stood up, his face hardening. Trace the call, he ordered. I want to know exactly where he's calling from. In the office, Nathan answered the call on speakerphone, allowing Emma to listen. Monsieur Morgan, Pierre's smooth and dangerous voice filled the room. We finally meet. What do you want? Nathan asked directly. Just a civilized conversation about our dear Emma. She has unique talents that are very valuable to me. She doesn't work for you anymore. A cold laugh sounded from the other end. No one ever really stops working for me, monsieur, but I'm willing to be reasonable. Let's say 10 million euros to forget everything. It's a bargain considering the value of your empire. And if I refuse, then I'll have to use other methods of persuasion. Emma knows what I'm capable of. Nathan looked at her, who was visibly trembling. You have 24 hours to think about it, Pierre continued. And Emma, ma chérie, if you're listening, remember Paris. Some debts need to be paid. The call ended, leaving a heavy silence in the office. Emma hugged her own belly, as if wanting to protect the babies from the invisible threat. He won't... Stop, she whispered. Pierre is like a predator. When he chooses a prey, he doesn't give up until he gets what he wants. Nathan knelt before her, taking her face in his hands. Then he doesn't know who he's fighting against. Emma, look at me. You're not alone anymore. But the money, your reputation, none of that matters, he interrupted, his voice laden with emotion. You and our children are what matters. The rest, we can rebuild the rest. Emma felt tears running down her face. Why? Why do you care so much? Nathan was silent for a moment, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. Because you changed everything, he finally admitted. Since you came into my life, you knocked down every wall I built, made me feel things that I swore I'd never feel again. Nathan, no, he continued, let me finish. I spent my whole life controlling everything, planning every step. Then you appeared, and for the first time, I don't want to control. I just want... One of the babies kicked strongly at that moment, making Emma laugh through her tears. They always choose the most dramatic moments, she smiled. Nathan placed his hand on her belly, feeling the movements of their children. It was a gesture. That had become natural between them, but this time it seemed loaded with new meanings. I love you, whispered Emma, the words escaping before she could contain them. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, as if the words had physically hit him. "I love you too," he replied, his voice hoarse, "and that's why I won't let Pierre destroy what we've built." The babies chose that moment to move vigorously, making Emma laugh through her tears. "They always know," she smiled. "Always, Nathan." Agreed, his hand joining hers over her belly. "And tomorrow we'll make sure they grow up in a world without threats." Outside the library, the first light of dawn began to tinge the New York sky. A new day was dawning, bringing with it promises of change, danger, and above all, hope. Martha, who was discreetly observing from the door, smiled to herself. In all her years of service, she had never seen her employer so alive, so human. Love, she thought, really had the power to transform even the hardest hearts. Morning arrived at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, with a surprisingly blue sky for New York. Nathan observed Fifth Avenue through the museum's great hall, the same place where, months ago, his world had begun to change. The place was empty at that hour, closed especially for the meeting. "The teams are in position," his head of security informed. "We have FBI support on all perimeters." Nathan nodded, adjusting his wristwatch. The board meeting had been tempestuous, but his decision was made. Some things were more important than business. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall. Pierre Dubois appeared, elegant in his Italian suit, as if he were arriving for a vernissage. "Mr. Morgan," he greeted, his smooth voice carrying a tone of irony. "What a pleasure to finally meet you in person." "Let's get straight to the point," Nathan cut in. "What do you really want?" "Straight to the point like a true businessman," Pierre smiled. "Very well. I want the files that Emma stole from me. In exchange, she goes free, to raise your lovely triplets in peace." "And if I said the files no longer exist?" Pierre laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the empty space. "Then we'd have a problem. Emma would be exposed as the criminal mastermind behind one of the largest art forgery schemes in history. Imagine the tabloids. The forger who seduced the American billionaire. Fascinating, non?" "You really think you can threaten my family and get away with it?" Nathan asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Family?" Pierre mocked. "Is that what you think you have with her? Emma is a survivor, monsieur. She does what she needs to survive. How do you think she managed to deceive me for so long?" "Deceive you?" A female voice echoed through the hall. Emma emerged from the shadows, her figure imposing even with her advanced pregnancy. Nathan made a move to stop her, but she raised her hand, asking for silence. "You never understood, Pierre," she continued. "It wasn't about survival. It was about doing the right thing." "Ma chérie," Pierre smiled, but there was something tense in his eyes. "You shouldn't be here. But I am. And I brought something with me." Emma made a signal and Olivia appeared carrying a folder. "The original files," Emma explained. "But not just that. In the last few months, your network began to crumble. Are your connections, your contacts, all documented and handed over to the proper authorities?" "Impossible," Pierre exclaimed, his mask of elegance beginning to crack. "You were so busy threatening me that you didn't notice," Emma continued. "While I was hiding here, others were working. Restorers, curators, people you betrayed over the years, all gathering evidence. At that moment, FBI agents began to emerge from the shadows of the museum. "It's over, Pierre," said Nathan, positioning himself next to Emma. "Interpol is waiting for you." Pierre looked around, like a cornered animal. For a moment it seemed like he was going to try something desperate, but then his shoulders fell. "You won, ma chérie," he said as the agents handcuffed him. "But tell me, was it worth it? Trading Paris for this?" Emma looked at Nathan, then caressed her belly. "Oui, every moment." After Pierre was taken away, Olivia approached the couple. "The board voted," she informed. "Your temporary leave was approved, Nathan, and I'm sorry for everything." Emma smiled, taking her sister-in-law's hand. "Family is family, non? Even when we make mistakes." Tears shone in Olivia's eyes, who nodded before discreetly moving away. Alone in the Met's Great Hall, Nathan turned to Emma. "When did you plan all this?" "It wasn't me," she smiled. "It was you. Your connections, your protection, gave me the strength I needed to face him." "Emma," he began, taking her hands. "That contract we made, I think we need to make a new one, a more permanent one." She laughed, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "Are you proposing to me, Mr. Morgan?" "I'm asking for much more than that," he replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm asking to build a life together, to raise our children, face our fears, heal our scars, together." The babies moved, as if approving the moment. "We," Emma whispered. "1,000 times we." The morning sun streamed through the Met's great hall, bathing the couple in a golden light. Outside, New York continued its frenetic pace, but inside, time seemed suspended in a perfect moment of love and new beginnings. Martha, who was discreetly observing from afar, wiped away a tear. In all her years at the Morgan mansion, she had never imagined seeing her employer like this, completely surrendered to love, finally at peace with his past. 9 weeks later, the birth of the triplets, 2 girls and a boy, was announced with discretion. The babies, with their green eyes like their mother's and their father's strong chin, brought with them the promise of a new chapter. And in the mansion's library, now decorated with Emma's drawings and family photos, the old contract remains stored as a reminder, no longer a legal document, but a testimony to how love can flourish in the most unexpected places, transforming business agreements into love stories that defy all odds,